Hello, early birds in here. We're just going to give it another minute or so to wait to get our full complement on the screen. Seeing some fabulous landscapes in the background of some of your photos. I hope they're real. I'm just going to give it another minute. Right. I think we're going to make a start, being 1 minute past 9. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I just wanted to welcome you. I'm Nikki Hansen, and I'm coming to you from Wadandi Budja, down in the southwest of Western Australia. And I'd like to acknowledge that we're all in different parts of Australia at the moment, and I'd like to pay our respects to the traditional owners of all these lands that you're on and where I'm on, and to elders past and present. I'd also really like to acknowledge the Bureau of Meteorology, who assisted us in the development of the questions for this survey and have given us feedback since. I'd also like to acknowledge the national and state peak bodies who have also given us a lot of support throughout this process, and everyone who completed the survey. The recording of this webinar and the PowerPoint deck PDF will be available after or later today, and it'll be on our website. I'll put a link in the chat later on, so you can go to that at your leisure. And any questions and comments throughout the webinar, please use the chat function, and I'll pass those questions through to Lauren. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Lauren Miller.
Thanks, Nikki. I'm just actually playing with my technology here. There we go. I've got it it's gone on to the first slide. Welcome, everybody, and thank you so much for your time today, and in particular for your time that, for those of you who completed the survey, took. This session is all about actually sharing everyone's information, so it's collective IP, so to speak. But what we've done is had a deep dive into analysing the information through the survey to provide some insights and some next steps. We've also got a couple of areas where we've found emerging questions that have come through associated with some of the findings, and where you see a question mark, where we're interested in your thoughts and feedback through the chat section. I am going to apologise in advance. The way I've got my limited screens set up here in my home office, I can't actually see the chat or any hand raises or anything like that. So I'll be relying on Nikki to facilitate that side of things. I'm also going to apologise in advance because this is truly a slide fest. There's a 60-page pack of information here. I'll be going through it probably too quickly for those of you who are interested in taking a deep dive into some of those sections. Where I've glossed over some where you might want to look more deeply into the actual numbers and information, and that's where it'll be available at a later point. So in terms of the executive summary and the way in which we're presenting this analysis, I do want to say and firstly declare that, you know, whilst I'm Executive Director of Outward Bound and I come to the NatCORR agenda and purpose with that lived experience, with the challenge of being within a changing climate and as we are outdoors. I'm not an expert on weather and weather interpretation. I did do geography weather in second year university and indeed deal with daily examples myself, but this information is actually a presentation of the collective information that's come from the results of the survey. And there were 140 responses to the survey that finished in February. Good response rate by state and organisation type. And we're presenting the analytics in 4 parts, and that's probably where my expertise does come into play, because I've been a business analyst and management consultant in the past. So the 4 parts are call for action, organisational readiness, weather forecasting need, and weather information sources. And then we'll wrap up by key messages and next steps. So jumping into it, the first section, a call for action. A little bit about the survey. The objectives really around this came from NatCORR's webinar co-designs, where many people raised concerns about, are we getting the sort of weather information we need in an accurate, timely way, in a way that supports our decision making and doesn't actually have adverse impacts as well. So it was an online survey of about 20 questions developed with the Bureau, and thank you to the Bureau for that support. And we had 140 responses. They were well distributed across Australia, so some representation from every state and territory, less so in the Northern Territory, and some good distribution across internal outdoor school programs, commercial and not-for-profit outdoor education and recreation providers, some tertiary players, and then a number from outdoor clubs, volunteers, and some from emergency services and land managers. So we've been able to, in some instances, cut the data and show insights where it did vary by state or by organisational type. But of course, you do get to a point when you do that the number in the survey responses are smaller. The first thing which was immediately obvious for us was that this is an important topic and there is a call for action from within the sector. 96%, this won't be a surprise to anybody in the outdoors, appreciate that actually important weather information is critical and important for safe planning and decision making. What did surprise us, that there was, in the open-ended question, there were 29 unprompted, open-worded responses that really emphasised the importance of the work, gratitude for the work, commenting on the need for training, and really keen to see some useful outcomes come from this. Most respondents were reasonably confident that they have sufficient information and skills to support decision making. So 16% very confident, 46% confident, a few not confident at all, and some neutral. And how confident are you of your skills and reading and interpreting weather skills? 7 out of 10 was the highest rating there, with 30% at the 7 out of 10, but pretty good. Most people sort of rate themselves in as reasonably confident and having the skills and information to support decision making. What was more interesting is that they're less confident as to whether or not they're up to date with global best practice. What is global best practice is a really valid question, but I guess it's that sense of do we have confidence that we really are as skilled and as up to date in a rapidly changing digital context too, about our practice in that context. So, and in this instance, you know, somewhat confident, neutral, and not at all confident. More than half of people are less than confident on this. And what really surprised us probably too was only 25% of respondents have attended training on weather and forecasting interpretation in the last 5 years, and half of those did so in their entry TAFE or university course. So the other sources there of where they've done it are there, but not a lot of people having attended training within the last 5 years. The other thing is that 77% don't know where to find relevant professional development on accessing and interpreting weather information. and only 26% of organisations make weather training available to their staff. Commercial providers had more awareness, with half of them aware of where to get professional development from. Clubs and not-for-profit and schools and tertiary less confident about where to get PD in this area from. And interestingly, clubs and volunteers were the group that was providing the most training to staff or volunteers in that instance. There's a really strong interest in training, which is where there's, I think, a really clear call for action here. 94% said they'd be interested in attending weather-specific webinars or workshops by weather experts for outdoor practitioners, and a lot of, open responses ending that emphasised that message. Some, of course, said no, they're fine. They're happy to use online sources and happy with the BOM information, but overall, a really strong call for action. Moving on to organisational readiness, and we look at what we're talking about here is what is the organisational context that people are using weather information in, and how are they using it, and what are industry norms associated with how ready you can be with access to weather information. 61% of respondents have a formal organisational process for weather information in planning outdoor activities. The sorts of formal processes that this includes is looking at seasonal outlooks, checking weather forecasts, incorporating that within their standard operating procedures and policies, in risk planning and assessments, and also use of thresholds, triggers and severe weather warnings. And you can see the percentage there differs a little bit by type. But what also was really interesting is that of that 39% who don't have formal processes for weather checks in planning, they do for running the activities. So in some instances, and it's different people too, some instances push the weather, incorporating the weather into the formal processes into the planning stage, others more so into the running. So here we see 60% have formal organisational processes for weather information in running outdoor activities. And the types of formal processes: checking weather forecasts, severe weather warnings, thresholds and triggers, standard operating procedures and policies. So what do those formal processes look like for weather in standard operating procedures and risk assessments? So in SOPs, you'll see people capturing and recording weather information. You'll see weather as being a broader part of pre-trip preparation that staff must follow, checklists, part of briefings, regular checks and so forth, and a process that's also incorporated in staff training and policies. Risk assessments include assessments of weather prior to activities, and it's a part of a risk assessment of the overall planning process, and built into also emergency and response management plans. Formal processes for weather checks for planning, seasonal outlooks and weather checks. A number of people are using web-based information and seasonal outlooks to see, what may occur in advance of a planned program, and then weather checks for planning, 24-hour checks, use of rainfall predictions, looking at event likelihood, and so forth in terms of the planning. It's really interesting. You could see sort of a different two sides of the spectrum in some of the responses around processes for weather checks while running programs. In some instances, organisations have highly specified processes that are within their SOPs, their risk management. They're using scheduled, timed weather checks that actually specify what the source is. They're using automatic alerts and setups, use of threshold triggers, severe weather warning policies and so forth. In other instances, organisations have less specified process and a deliberate reliance on professional judgment of the group leaders and practitioners and volunteers in the field. So it's really interesting to see that full spectrum that I think we all know, of course, is important contextually. But the key question, I think, for all of us is where should we be on the spectrum, what's right for us and in what circumstances. Weather warnings thresholds are used by 70% of organisations. 25% don't use them, and 6% of respondents weren't sure. So this is where it's once again interesting to see that some organisations are using formal thresholds and formal policies that are a guide to stop activity, modify activity, and decision support frameworks. Versus those that are relying more on exercising professional judgment. This one was fascinating, and the range of input that people provided here was really terrific, because people went down to a level of granularity that I think has really contributed to the richness of this. So the use of thresholds varies by type and by level. And it's really interesting when you look here, when you look at extreme heat, there's a wide variation here associated with what temperature and, whether or not it's a cancellation, modification or whatever. It's also wind is another one where there was enormous variation in terms of what sort of wind levels might be an appropriate threshold for modifying activities. And of course, once again, that depends on what activity and where and who your participants are. And the other area is predicted rainfall, where there was a lot of variation. Bushfire, of course, has been quite a bit of work in the sector associated with that, around clarity of what the actions and the signalling should be. This is, I'm putting this out here with no judgment. This is actually, I think, a really interesting area, and one that the sector has, been thinking about and aware of for some time. But certainly there were comments around, at the very least, people would like to see more sharing, like, who is using what sort of guidelines and triggers that, I think might be a key learning from us. Severe weather warnings are a very obvious threshold and trigger. And there was quite a bit of commentary around this. And particularly when severe weather warnings that are issued are accompanied by instructions that may or may not be appropriate for people who are already outdoors and for whom sheltering indoors is not an option. There's also an awareness that there is a lot of external advice and instructions playing a role in what these triggers and thresholds might be. And this is where, we start to see the complexity of the ecosystem in this place. National parks, of course, have various triggers and thresholds of their own, and their own different policies around thresholds and closures in different jurisdictions and by park. Different state education departments have different guidelines. Some specify thresholds, others don't. There are, of course, fire and emergency services are very active in this space and provide advice and sometimes thresholds. And then there's the AAAS, the Australian Adventure Activity Standards, where there's we're about to review that. At the moment, there are very limited thresholds and advice in terms of the use of triggers and thresholds. There's just broad guidelines. So we've kind of put a question out there, in terms of the review of the AAAS, what would be useful for the sector in terms of the concept of thresholds and triggers. So interested in your ideas around that. There was quite a bit here too around the need for contextual considerations, that organisational SOPs allow for variation within location, activity and the nature of the warning. And I think for all practitioners here today, that we've got a strong awareness of this. Part of it is associated with the accuracy and specifics of the weather information that we're getting refined enough to actually directly apply to our location and our activity. Or secondly, it very much varies on what is the nature of the activity, how easy is it to evacuate, develop a plan B, what's the level of preparedness of participants and so forth. And I think there were a lot of strong messages here around we want to make sure that we don't tie ourselves up in knots, that we actually want to allow for variation and flexibility associated with context. A key message here too, emphasising professional judgment. And this one's a really interesting one because, we do, of course, have training, and we're moving to a more professional model is probably what I'd say in terms of somebody that's been around for a while, in terms of professional skill-based qualifications. But we also need to have an awareness that we don't want to just rely on judgment if indeed not everybody has those skills and qualifications, or indeed an experience base. So I think, the question of balance here is a really subtle one, but we do want to make sure that we are actually listening to and allowing for professional judgment of those who are actually in the field and are trained to make professional judgments. I think I skipped one. Organisational decision-making is most commonly shared between the field and the office. This probably isn't a surprise, but it's interesting to see how this balance varies slightly across schools, clubs and volunteers, and commercial providers. And I think for most of us, it's probably reassuring to see that there is a balance in this. Most of respondents are confident that they know how to respond to a severe weather warning. So a good degree of confidence in terms of very confident or confident, knowing how to respond when a severe weather warning is issued, and confident that they can take action to protect themselves. It's interesting when it comes down into the concept of duty of care. Less confident about capacity to provide another person with enough warning to respond adequately to a severe weather event. So 20% lack confidence in their capacity to provide others with enough warning to respond to a severe weather event. And of course, given that a core part of what most of us are doing is providing duty of care for others in the outdoors, I think this is an area where we'd really like to see a higher degree of confidence. Commercial providers are the most confident, followed by clubs and volunteers. And there's a little bit of differentiation, but of course, smaller sample sizes there. Smaller sample sizes here too when you look at this data by state. But interestingly, Queensland, 40% of responses lacked confidence in their capacity to provide others with enough warning to respond to a severe weather event. So whether or not that's to do with the nature of weather events in Queensland or their recent experiences, that's kind of really interesting, but it's ACT, New South Wales and Queensland who have those lower levels of confidence in their capacity to respond to those severe weather events for duty of care. Weather forecasting needs. So one of the really valuable pieces of information that came out of the survey is that we've been able to collate 7 key clear messages for what does the outdoor sector need for weather forecasting. The first one is confidence in the source, ownership and intent. So knowing that the sources of information that we're relying on are trustworthy, that they're not skewed, and that they're actually aligned with our purpose is really important. The second one is reputation and reliability. So trust in the reliability and the past accuracy of the source. We want to know that their source has a proven track record and that the weather information actually aligns with their experience of on-the-ground conditions. Knowing about the quality of the data and the models builds trust in assessing accuracy of predictions. The third one is accuracy for local terrain. Outdoor practitioners are looking for accurate forecasting for specific locations and terrains that, you know, as we all know, aren't necessarily the CBD and highly populated areas that the weather forecasts are naturally primarily serving. They're also looking for information to support specific outdoor activities, for example, canyoning, which is a high need for information about rain and water flows, alpine hiking for thunderstorms in particular, and stargazing. You know, what's the weather, what's the cloud cover going to be? Frequency and timeliness, we're looking for regular updates, timeliness and real-time data for making informed decisions. We're also interested in a user-friendly experience. So user-friendly interfaces and ease of access to the information because quite often we need to do it quickly. As we'll see in the next section, there's a high degree of fragmentation at the moment. We'd ideally like a more national approach with more emphasis on a one-stop source and role clarity between some of the players within this space. Local interpretation and insights. We're also keen to ensure that there is interpretation of local knowledge to help interpret forecasts and context in specific areas, particularly for remote and less populated areas, where on-the-ground information can be really important in terms of complementing formal forecasts. And the other area, which we'll see more about too in the next section, is that we're interested in multiple source comparison. So many rely, around 30%, rely on cross-referencing information from multiple sources and locations to enhance accuracy. So comparing information across different platforms and considering consistency in forecasts over time helps us gauge a sense of reliability and helps that decision support. Thunderstorms and wind are the most concerning weather elements for outdoor practitioners, with thunderstorms and lightning, strong gusts and winds, followed by bushfire, heavy or continuous rain and heat. There was a little bit of variation within the scaling of this between organisations and state, but to be honest with you, it was pretty consistent in terms of, this is the, you know, scale of what we worry about and are concerned about. Information. Bushfires and heat concerns clubs and volunteers a bit more than others, was the only takeaway in terms of differentiation. Location, timing and severity is the most important severe weather information. So where is it going to be? Specifics on the location, when, level of severity. Chance was rated fourth in terms of importance, impacts much lower, and protective actions much lower in terms of importance as well. And I think that's where you'll be seeing some sense that quite often the advice on protective actions is not really applicable or helpful for an outdoor context. This one's hard to interpret, and really there's not a lot of key takeaways from this in terms of how and when do we want weather forecasts. We want them all the time. We want them updated regularly. Real time's important. Daily, in advance, it's all important, really, I think is probably what I'd say from this one. So there's not a lot of differentiated messages out of that one, except we want it real time and as timely as possible. Generally, the BOM weather warning systems are mostly sufficient. So thank you, BOM, for the support that you do give the sector and the way in which it does help and support us. Sufficient, 32%, somewhat sufficient, 62%, insufficient, 5%. Some of the pieces of feedback and suggestions: it would be useful if the BOM app made it easier to access meta information and accumulated rainfall. BOM YouTube is an excellent resource that's contributed and supported decision making. The more informed that we can be, the improving of models, there's lots of please just keep improving and doing better. And some concerns over whether or not the resourcing is sufficient at BOM to actually meet our needs. We would like, as a sector, more specific, timely storm information. So a lot of quotes here in terms of what we would like, in particular, looking for BOM lightning tracking and wind at different elevations. There is quotes there about, when people have been caught out with severe weather events and storms that are hard to predict or localised, but very much an emphasis on the need for storm, lightning radar, information, and information that is specific to some of the locations in which we operate and where we have people in the outdoors. This one I put in as my own example in terms of timeliness. From the 30th of May, what do you do when you're an outdoor provider and a severe weather warning is issued at 11:28 p.m? It's kind of hard to know because, of course, people will already be in bed, maybe asleep, and what is your capacity to respond if indeed they're not as timely or they're coming through at times when your options are very limited. There was a lot of messages around the desire for coverage to be improved. So more weather stations to support forecasting in high-use outdoor recreation and education areas, and improve forecasting via satellite devices for out-of-mobile signal remote access. Quite a bit of information and some specific about concerns within the Blue Mountains area, Broken Hill for stargazing, remote areas of Tasmania, and some, insight too in terms of where technology is not quite where we would like to be. There's also a lot of commentary about concerns at the risk of unnecessary cancellation. So blanket overcautious advice or inaccurate forecasting of severe weather that does not eventuate can result in unnecessary cancellation of programs, which of course has serious economic and workload implications for the sector, and it creates an additional risk aversion for participation. So on the one hand, whilst it creates an additional risk aversion for participation, if indeed the need for cancellation doesn't arise, it increases the likelihood that people are sceptical about the next weather warning that comes through and whether or not cancellation is really necessary. This one's really hard because, of course, decision makers within the sector will be balancing a whole range of decision factors: duty of care, care for the environment, wanting to get people out there, the implications from a financial and workload perspective of cancelling or making changes. But for us, the nature of the severe weather warning, the way in which it's worded, the timing with which it comes through, has in a lot of instances made things very difficult. And I think all of us would know of stories of where we've cancelled or made alternative arrangements, and then the weather event hasn't come to light. We'd like the BOM to give more attention to people outdoors. Whilst we're not a big industry sector necessarily, we are a big people sector. There are a lot of people that as we know, who actually enjoy the great outdoors, and we think it's really important that actually duty of care to people who are outdoors in weather events where we're more exposed is taken into consideration from the way in which BOM targets its services and its information. More than 90% of respondents like the idea of specific weather forecasting services for the outdoors, and people raised the suggestion there was potential to link that to a risk planning tool or framework, but we would want it to account for context and participant experience and not be a simplistic version of the BOM that just referred you back to the BOM. And there are a number of quotes there that indicate people's sentiment, that support people's sentiment in this space. We also need help navigating what is available through the Bureau. Work needs to be put, as I'm quoting here, work needs to be put in to make BOM friendlier for all users. BOM has an incredible amount of information, but it's often hard to find the thing you need or re-find the thing you found. For instance, I often struggle to find the river water level predictions and end up in the historic data section, which has no clear link to predictions. There also appears to be historic outdated stuff, which has been superseded by new systems, but the old stuff still lingers and pulls attention. It all needs to be consolidated into better pages and an easier to use system. And somebody calling for actions for sort of for us to help advocate for better funding for specific outdoor sector activities at the BOM. On to weather information sources. Weather information is most frequently sourced from websites and apps. That's not going to be a surprise to most of you here. The 77% of respondents use automatic notifications, which I think is great. 57% use social media, but only 10% use it regularly. And then otherwise, you'll see some of the other big players are the emergency services, local government, and there is still radio, television, newspapers, marine radio, all playing a part within this space. This one I found, I mean, some people were surprised by this and others not. I kind of was surprised, just at the level of the number and diversity of the sources. So there were over 100 different named sources for accessing information, and that's in 140 people putting the responding to the survey. So across looking for information for climate outlooks, weather forecasts, severe weather, fire conditions, heat, flood, coastal conditions, air quality, water quality, cyclones and snow, here's the 100 different spots that the sector uses. Of course, some of this is exacerbated a little bit by the fact that there are state-based sources that form part of it, but there's also a really broad range of providers here, both government, not-for-profit and commercial sources. So what we've done is across each of those weather source elements, analysed where are people going for this information. So for climate forecast, and in most instances, pretty much always the Bureau of Meteorology is the primary source, but you'll see here too a number of instances where the number of sources used is down in the bottom left corner of the slide, and the range of other sources that are drawn on is also listed for all of these. So for climate outlooks, not just the Bureau, Weather Zone, Windy, the internet broadly, and other, where there's a broad range of different longer term forecasters, some of them Edgar long range forecast, Darawal, and other different players within this space. For weather forecasts, Bureau of Meteorology is the primary source for 85% of respondents, but 35% of respondents use more than one source here. And this is where you see Windy, Weather Zone and Willy start to play a considerable role in this. We don't have information as to whether or not those people are using a subscription fee for service or whether or not they're just using the free service. But there's another full range of different sources that people are using. State emergency apps are used in addition to the Bureau for severe weather warnings. You'll see 20% use SES and state emergency services as a source for severe weather warnings, and in this instance, 40% use more than one source. So when a severe weather warning comes through, people are really diving for multiple sources to verify and try and dive down into what information is going to help and support their decision making. Of course, one of the challenges is if you get contradictory information, which bit do you look at? And indeed, if you've got multiple decision makers, parents, people back at school, people in the field, people in the office, looking at different sources, how do you then integrate that into a format that provides the best and most appropriate decision support? And how do you actually even have a record to justify what that decision was based on? Information on bushfire conditions is mainly sourced from state emergency and fire services. So this is the one area where you'll see BOMs play a smaller, reduce a little bit. 35% are using more than one source, and you start to see the different ecosystem and fires near me, hazards near me, My Fire Watch, all sorts of ones starting in that part of that. The heat bureau is by far the predominant source. 76% just use BOM for heat, and there are a few other ones coming into that play there. But what's really interesting about this one, because heat is Australia's largest causes the most fatalities from natural disaster. So this one is one where we're really keen to lean in on and ensure that we actually get the support that we need for the outdoors in this space. Floods and river levels, lots sourced from the Bureau, but also you start to see water authorities and river sites here, state emergency services, and some other specific sites associated with river levels and local government. Coastal information sees some more specific ones, apps that are tailored towards coast conditions. 68% with the Bureau still, and 30% using more than one source. Air quality, less respondents in this. 43 respondents left this area blank or NA, and sources may differ if indeed people are concerned about smoke or thunderstorm asthma in terms of where they're looking at, and some of the more traditional news sources are where people might rely on here if it actually, they may not seek this information out initially, they might actually respond if they've heard it on news or radio that there are concerns around it. Water quality is mainly sourced from water authorities, a bit of BOM, EPA, local government, and some commentary that for some in local and specific areas that it's concerns that it's harder to find out than it should be. Cyclones, people are mainly using the BOM. Nearly half of respondents left NA or blank, obviously due to location. And then when it comes to snow, we start to see the role of the resorts. Resorts and snow cams come into play. Bureau is still at 68%. We didn't have a lot from Mountain Watch Safety Collective, only a small number, which I thought it might be a little bit more than that, but that's probably to do too with the distribution of respondents. 38% are using more than one source in this instance, and there was a fair bit of word of mouth. I know the patrol are up there. So from this 100 different sources across these different weather pieces, there was a call for less fragmentation of information or a national approach. Whether a national approach is realistic given the way in which the states are organised for emergency response, I really am not too sure. But, from a user experience perspective, I think we can all see that there is a lot of fragmentation of data sources, and it's really frustrating for people. So as a question for us to consider, as we started, and I did a bit of Googling as I came across, references to weather apps and things that I hadn't heard of before. How will changes in the forecasting market impact the outdoor sector? And it's interesting when we look to North America, for example, where there is now quite a large component of crowdsourced weather information that is being used in commercial weather networks and available for outdoor practitioners. Is that something we're going to see more of? The commercial weather providers, Weather Zone, Windy, Welly, are certainly sources that we use. Will they grow more? Don't know. At the moment, when you go onto their websites, you can see that they're providing tailored information to support large industry sectors like mining, agriculture, energy, aviation, insurance, and media. But there's no mention of services for the outdoor sector, probably because we're small and highly distributed, and I'm not sure that they see the commercial return in that. But how could we be engaging more to see what's available for that? And the other thing is that there are fee subscription services with a number of these providers, but unless you actually subscribe, it's pretty hard for small schools or not-for-profits or volunteer organisations to know what's best, what's value for money, what is going to meet their specific needs. So really interested to hear people's thoughts on this one. And this one is here for a little bit of light relief. What information can you rely on? I popped onto Weather Zone on the 10th of June, opening weekend for Mount Buller, and was a little bit surprised to see this year's highest extremes. Highest temp, Mount Buller, Victoria had 62.9 degrees Celsius on the 30th of May. So anybody wondering why the season opening at Mount Buller was not quite what it should have been, there's your answer. Similarly, I'm somewhat suspicious that Pound Creek in Victoria didn't experience minus 69 on the 20th of February as well. That's not a critique of Weather Zone, who is typically a terrific service, but of course, I'm sure there's some sort of technical or human error here that is always going to be part of it. But for us, it's, we do need and to be able to rely on our sources. So one of the other questions that's been really fascinating for NatCORR, and Nikki has done a lot of conversations around, is the question is, who are our outdoor sector experts or gurus in weather? It was interesting over at the North American Wilderness Risk Management Conference. I saw a great presentation from an Alaskan expert, Luke Mayer, who's had 20 years in this, who's offering PD and training in Alaska and North America, in particular around ice and avalanche and snow and conditions. And he's totally across all of the different apps. How do you use the data and the digital things combined with on the ground interpretation? He runs courses and programs in it, and we haven't been able to find the Australian guru. And it might be unrealistic for there to be one. And of course, we've got a wide range of different climates around this big brown country. But I think for us, one of the answers to this is for us to actually try and build a community of outdoor weather gurus, so that we all know, who do you give a call to? How do we get the best advice? Who's providing input to the training? So as a question here, what are the best mechanisms for sharing and transfer expertise for us as a sector in a rapidly changing information and climate context? So summary of key messages. So key messages for action, firstly for the outdoor sector. I think there's significant evidence that there's a need for us to develop training and weather decision support around probably the two elements: organisational readiness, like, what should our stops and processes and practices be to support weather decision support, and also on accessing and interpreting weather information. For us, I think it'd be great if we can build a community of outdoor weather experts to track and share learning, and also for us to engage with researchers for learning and publication, which is something that we've got as a work in progress. I think it's also probably a good idea for us to consider threshold guidelines in the review of the AAAS, and also highlight and lobby for the outdoor sector needs in weather forecasting. For the Bureau, strong messages. We'd really like timely updates of weather warning, and ideally coming through at a time in which we can actually make meaningful decisions and act. Addition of lightning alerts on the BOM, and I think in one of our meetings with the Bureau recently there was some indications that something might be occurring in that space, but I don't want to promise or speak for them. More stations to improve local forecast accuracy in outdoor recreation settings, more attention to and tailored services for the outdoor sectors, meaningful wording, and to help us avoid unnecessary cancellations. We'd love to improve the ease of access to the Bureau's information, and for there to be consideration of a national approach or less fragmentation of information. We'd also like to have some training on how to find and use the Bureau's services, which we know are the primary and most trusted source of information for us for the outdoor sector, and then collectively ensuring that we're improving communication between the Bureau and the outdoor sector. And I think this survey and the work that we've been doing with them over the last 9 months and how we'll take this forward is a really good step in that direction. The next steps for NatCORR, the Bureau have asked us to formally present the report to the Bureau. I know we have people here from the Bureau today, and thank you for your attention and your work, including feedback from this webinar. So we'll collate questions and information from the chat to incorporate in that formal communications with the Bureau. We're planning to work with the Bureau on creating some professional development training for the outdoor sector, and hoping that that will include some online training as a guide to the Bureau's services, and also some professional development for the sector around both organisational readiness, accessing weather information and decision support. With Brendan Munge and Atoan, we're wanting to take the learnings from this survey into probably 2 papers, one around the organisational readiness question and secondly around weather information access. We'd also like to, and this is just an idea and we're putting out there, call for expressions of interest in outdoor weather expert or guru group. If that's you or you think you know who it is, then please let us know. We've been having a few conversations on this one, but we're still looking and keen to hear. We'll also be doing some feedback and liaisons with peaks, so that once the review of a AAAS gets underway, this information can be incorporated for around considerations of thresholds or organisational readiness. So at 11:52, I haven't done too badly, Nikki. I never know how the timing's going to go, and apologies to everybody because it has been a total talk fest. I'm hoping there's been some rich information come through in the comments section, but I'm able to stop there. As Nikki said, the webinar recording and PDF deck will go up on the website, and Nikki's email is down there for specific follow-up. We've got couple of minutes. Nikki, do you want to comment on where we're at in terms of responses, questions and so forth?
Sure. So we've had a little bit come up in the chat, particularly around the AAAS, and thanks to David Chitty, who's no longer, he's had to drop out of the meeting, but he's sort of talking about the fact that he, as he rightly pointed out, that's also the GPG's and that there is a severe weather guidance note that's far more detailed around weather, but that is only for severe weather warning. So I'm just saying that I agree with him, but that the work needs to be done in other areas of weather conditions outside of severe weather warnings. So that's, again, heat was a big one. And then he's sort of suggesting that that's the document that we need to be working on. He suggested that there was originally a Victorian document that was reviewed and updated as a national document in recent years. So if anyone knows anything about that, I'd love to know a little bit more. And we've had a guru, a couple of guru or suggestions. Anthony Cornelius, who's a meteorologist in Southeast Queensland, and that also people are happy to help with the idea of a weather guru. I'd also like to add that at the end of the year for the National Out to Red Conference, we've got a couple of presentations. One is actually going to be specifically around this weather survey, but also in terms of where it's gone, research-wise, between now and the end of the year, with the group that Lauren mentioned, headed by Brendan Munge and a Toan contribution into that. So that will also be something to look out for. But we're talking about potentially, instead of when we put professional development on the ground, instead of relying necessarily on one person as the sole source or the guru, that we might have a panel of people who have this expertise in terms of delivery of professional development. So what we'd really like from you guys input wise is around professional development. So the best thing to do is, you might want to take this away, digest it, have a look at the results again on our website, but then email me if you are specifically interested in getting involved, or if you've got ideas around the professional development needs that you think would be relevant for the sector.
Thanks, Nikki. One of the things that I was probably most impressed with Luke Mayer was his deep knowledge and expertise of the digital side of things. And I'm not sure, because, I think we kind of know that there's a lot of wise heads within this space who've got some very good on the ground, even traditional weather interpretation skills and so forth. But, the digital space is moving so quickly. I think we really want to identify people who love that technical side of things and who are up to date and know what apps and sources are, the best place to go to for specific areas. So a particular call out in that digital expertise would be really good.
And thanks,
and Nikki,
Lauren. Sorry, just one moment. I just wanted to also add, someone has, and we might not have explained this well enough, that yes, indeed, the Bureau do provide good professional development courses that are suitable for the outdoor industry. And the comment was, use these and do not reinvent the wheel. So we are suggesting that the professional development that we put on the ground is actually in partnership with the Bureau. So we already have and are in discussion with them about that. So it will include Bureau trainers.
Yeah, so we're very much working hand in hand with the Bureau on this, and timing wise, we're hoping to get that on the ground in the first part of next year.
Fantastic. So we've also, we've put my emails in the chat as well as the link to the events. But like I said, give me a little bit of time to be able to upload the recording and get that on there. So I'd say tomorrow will be safe, and we'll also have that a PDF of the deck so that you can really have a look at the detail in there.
Great. Well, I think that gives everybody time to go and get their cup of tea before the 12 o'clock meeting. So
hang on, sorry, Lauren, one more. I need to put this in there. Another comment. Thank you very much for that comment about the fact that the PD can be expensive or difficult to schedule, be pointless if field staff and program managers can't access it. So the idea with that, Dave, is that will then become an online offering so that it will be accessible to all.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for your time today. You know, an important and evolving story for us all. Thanks once again to the Bureau and to everybody for filling out the survey. And yeah, stay in touch, and we look forward to taking our next steps on this.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.